The sun had barely pierced the horizon when the first galleons of the Spanish treasure fleet slipped silently out of Havana harbor, their hulls groaning under the weight of silver, gold, and cargo taken from the New World. These ships were more than vessels. They were floating vaults of ambition, each plank and sail a testament to Spain's dominance over oceans, continents, and the lives of countless men who had toiled in mines, ports, and aboard decks that became both prison and battleground. The very air seemed charged with expectation and fear, for the wealth they carried was unparalleled, and the dangers of the Atlantic were as legendary as the riches themselves. Storms, reefs, disease, and pirates were not distant threats. They were waiting, invisible predators that would test the limits of human endurance and the value of empire. Spain's obsession with the New World had begun decades earlier, when explorers returned from Caribbean coasts with tales of gold, silver, and spices so vast that they seemed almost mythical. Hernán Cortés had toppled the Aztec Empire, Francisco Pizarro had crushed the Incas, and countless other expeditions brought back treasures that transformed the Iberian Peninsula into the richest kingdom in Europe. Gold dust from rivers, silver from mines like Potosí and Zacatecas, and exotic commodities such as cacao, indigo, and pearls flooded Spanish ports. Each shipment not only enriched the monarchy and its noble elite, but also fueled Europe's appetite for expansion, colonization, and trade. The promise of wealth created a network of extraction and transport that stretched thousands of miles, and with it came ambition, danger, and human suffering on an industrial scale. The Spanish treasure fleets were born out of this extraordinary system, organized to protect enormous wealth while sustaining the flow of empire. Havana became the crown jewel of this network, its harbor a staging ground where fleets assembled before the treacherous voyage across the Atlantic. The fleets consisted of dozens of ships, galleons, naus, and caravels, each constructed to withstand storms, carry tons of treasure, and repel pirates. Heavy timbers, reinforced decks, and formidable artillery were balanced against the need for speed and maneuverability. Cargo was meticulously calculated, silver ingots and coins stacked low in the hold for stability, chests of gold carefully locked, and exotic goods, cacao, pearls, spices, and fine fabrics, layered for both preservation and efficiency. Every ship was a microcosm of empire, a floating vault whose loss could ripple through continents. Yet the wealth aboard these ships was inseparable from the human cost. Sailors, soldiers, and pilots faced months at sea, confined to narrow decks where disease spread like wildfire and discipline was enforced with brutal rigor. Malaria, scurvy, dysentery, and typhus were constant companions, claiming lives before the ships ever reached the Atlantic. Punishments for disobedience were harsh: flogging, confinement, or even execution on deck, while the hierarchy favored captains and officers, leaving ordinary sailors to navigate storms, exhaustion, and hunger. Despite this, men lined the decks with courage, hope, or desperation, aware that the payoffs of survival were immense, but the odds of death were real and immediate. The Atlantic itself was a force to be reckoned with. Hurricanes, shifting currents, and hidden shoals had claimed more treasure than pirates ever could. Captains studied charts and wind patterns meticulously, but even the most experienced navigators could be undone by a sudden storm or miscalculated course. The fleet's schedule was tightly managed. Delays could mean disaster as the Caribbean hurricane season approached. Entire fleets had been destroyed in a single season, their treasure swallowed by the ocean, their crews left to die or drift for days, survivors telling tales that would fuel legends for centuries. The very geography of the Atlantic was both a highway and a graveyard, shaping Spanish strategy and creating a persistent tension between risk and reward. Pirates and privateers were the ever-present threat that transformed treasure fleets into moving battlegrounds. Englishmen, Frenchmen, and Dutch sailors prowled the Atlantic, their eyes on Spain's silver and gold. Sir Francis Drake, one of the most infamous privateers of the era, raided fleets and harbors with precision and brutality, turning maritime robbery into both profit and political warfare. Pirates were motivated not only by wealth, but by the chance to strike at an empire that had long dominated Europe's coffers. Convoys became essential as multiple ships sailing together could repel attack with combined firepower. The fleet was a floating fortress, yet even a galleon bristling with cannons could be overwhelmed by superior numbers, cunning strategy, or the sheer luck of wind and tide. The treasure fleets also embodied the empire's obsession with control. Silver and gold were meticulously accounted for, each ingot stamped with marks to trace origin and authenticity. Merchants and crown officials maintained records of every chest, every coin, and every cargo manifest. Losses were catastrophic. A sunken galleon meant not only missing wealth, but also disrupted supply lines, delayed payments, and diplomatic repercussions across Europe. The treasure fleets were as much a tool of governance as they were vessels of trade, a symbol that Spain could claim dominion over the oceans and the riches beneath them. As the fleet crossed the Gulf Stream, the ocean became a stage for both ambition and desperation. Sailors stood watch, scanning horizons for storms and sails alike. Below deck, silver bars were counted, personal belongings tucked into crates, and fragile goods layered to survive the rolling waves. Every decision, from adjusting the sails to distributing rations, could determine the survival of crew and cargo alike. The Atlantic was indifferent to wealth. It demanded respect, precision, and courage. The tension between human ingenuity and natural power created a rhythm aboard the fleet, a constant negotiation between empire and mortality. Yet despite the danger, the lure of treasure was irresistible. Legends of lost gold and silver circulated even before fleets sailed, fueling speculation, maps, and obsession. Some believed the sea itself conspired to hide riches from mortal hands, preserving wealth until fortune, skill, or folly allowed it to resurface. Shipwrecks became stories of caution and wonder. Entire fleets vanished in hurricanes, leaving only scattered debris or skeletal remains, while treasure hunters risked life and limb for a chance at recovery. Each voyage carried the promise of fortune, the risk of death, and the weight of empire, making the treasure fleets a microcosm of human ambition at its most daring. The interplay of wealth, danger, and empire defined the Spanish treasure fleets. Gold and silver were not only currency, but instruments of power, shaping international diplomacy, war, and trade. The Atlantic was both highway and obstacle, rewarding preparation, but punishing hubris. Every galleon carried stories of miners in the Andes toiling under brutal conditions, of sailors enduring hunger and disease, of captains making split-second decisions against storm and tide. Even centuries later, the wrecks left behind testify to ambition, ingenuity, and human resilience. The sunken treasures of the Spanish Empire remain a powerful reminder of how oceans and ambition intersect. Silver bars resting on the seafloor, gold ingots entombed in coral, and the remnants of galleons crushed by reefs are more than artifacts. They are narratives frozen in time, connecting the New World to Europe, labor, to wealth and human endeavor, to natural forces beyond control. They preserve a history of empire, danger, and obsession that continues to captivate explorers, historians, and treasure hunters. The story of these fleets begins with the simplest of ambitions, to move wealth from the Americas to Spain, yet it becomes a tale of epic scale, ships carrying fortunes, oceans claiming their due, and men confronting mortality as the price of empire. Each voyage of a treasure fleet was a high-stakes gamble with everything riding on skill, luck, and courage. And though the riches were immense, the human cost, ships lost, lives destroyed, empires shaken, was equally monumental. Centuries later, the call of the treasure fleets persists. Modern archaeologists, divers, and historians chase the ghost of gold and silver, uncovering artifacts that illuminate the past with startling clarity. The sea preserves these stories, not as legends alone, but as tangible evidence of ambition, risk, and loss. The treasures of the Spanish Empire rest beneath the waves, eternal witnesses to the human drama that played out across oceans, storms, and centuries. In the end, the sun rises again over Havana, waves crash against coral reefs, and the Atlantic stretches endlessly into the horizon. Somewhere beneath its depths, silver, gold, and the remains of the fleet sleep in silence, waiting for those bold enough to uncover their stories and patient enough to listen to what the ocean remembers. When the call came to assemble the fleet, the harbors of Spain and its colonies became a hive of activity, as if the empire itself were taking a deep, deliberate breath before projecting power across the Atlantic. The treasure fleets were not mere ships. They were embodiments of a nation's might, floating fortresses designed to transport unimaginable wealth while surviving one of the most perilous voyages on Earth. Each vessel was meticulously planned, engineered to withstand hurricanes, evade pirates, and carry the immense riches of the New World. The Spanish monarchy knew that the success of the empire depended not only on conquest, but on the ability to transport treasure safely across oceans that respected no crown or law. The construction of a galleon was an enterprise of ambition, patience, and extraordinary skill. Spanish shipyards, most famously in Seville, Havana, and Cadiz, buzzed with carpenters, blacksmiths, sailmakers, and riggers. Each ship was a complex organism of wood, rope, and iron, built to balance cargo capacity with maneuverability and armament. Massive timbers, often sourced from the forests of Spain or the Americas, were carefully selected for resilience and treated to resist the relentless assault of saltwater. Hulls were reinforced with iron nails and plates. Decks were designed to bear the weight of both cannon and cargo, and the rigging, a labyrinth of ropes and pulleys, was engineered to make the ship responsive to the whims of wind and sea. Size alone made these ships remarkable. A fully loaded galleon could exceed 1 to 200 tons, carrying dozens of cannons and hundreds of crew members, plus cargo that included silver bars, gold ingots, exotic spices, fine textiles, cacao, pearls, and other treasures collected from the Americas. The weight of such a ship was not incidental. It influenced stability, speed, and even survival in storms. Every plank was placed with purpose, every mast raised with calculation. The galleon was a compromise between vault and vessel, fortress and freight carrier, designed to project Spain's power while preserving its wealth. Armament was as vital as construction. Cannons lined the decks in neat rows, each capable of firing iron shot, capable of shattering enemy hulls. A well-armed galleon could hold off smaller pirate vessels and provide mutual protection within a convoy. Yet the cannons were not just for defense. They were a declaration of sovereignty, a floating embodiment of Spain's control over its maritime empire. Soldiers were stationed to man these guns, trained to fire in unison, and drilled in formations meant to intimidate as much as to defend. The sight of a fleet bristling with artillery inspired awe in both friend and foe, and deterred opportunistic attacks that could easily devastate a lone galleon. Design considerations went beyond combat. The shape of the hull was crucial for stability, particularly in rough waters. Galleons were longer and narrower than earlier ships, with a higher forecastle and aft castle to manage waves and improve maneuverability. Cargo holds were deep and reinforced. capable of distributing thousands of pounds of silver and gold evenly to prevent capsizing. Even small design choices, such as the placement of ballast or the curvature of the bow, were dictated by centuries of maritime knowledge, trial, and disaster. Every galleon carried with it lessons learned from previous losses, from the reefs of the Caribbean to the hurricanes of the Atlantic. Sail design was equally critical. Multiple masts with square sails allowed for speed across open ocean, while lateen sails on smaller masts improved maneuvering during storms or when evading enemies. Sailors had to climb the rigging under perilous conditions to adjust sails, a task that demanded physical strength, courage, and precision. A misjudged maneuver could mean torn canvas, lost speed, or a dangerous drift into shallow reefs. Sail efficiency could decide the difference between arriving safely in Spain or becoming another ghost ship lost to history. Crew composition was a careful balance of skill, hierarchy, and numbers. Captains commanded the fleet with absolute authority, yet their success depended on the loyalty, expertise, and endurance of their men. Pilots, navigators, and helmsmen guided the ships with celestial charts and rudimentary compasses, while soldiers ensured order and defended the treasure. Sailors worked in shifts, braving the elements, performing exhausting labor, and living in conditions that would test the limits of any human body. The galleon was a confined, high-stakes environment where one mistake could have catastrophic consequences. Beyond mechanics and crew, the galleons were symbols of imperial power. The Spanish monarchy used these ships as political instruments, showcasing Spain's dominance over the Atlantic and the Americas. Flags flew prominently on masts. Figureheads carved into bows represented saints, monarchs, or protective symbols. Every detail, from decorative carvings to the organization of cargo, was designed to project authority and command respect. The fleet was a message to the world. Spain ruled both the lands and seas of its empire, and its treasure fleets were living proof of that supremacy. The process of assembling the fleet magnified these stakes. Ships from Havana, Veracruz, and other colonial ports would converge, escorted by armed galleons, before embarking together across the Atlantic. Timing was essential. Leaving too early could mean exposure to hurricane season, while delays could invite pirate attacks or logistical complications. Each fleet was a complex operation, a choreography of human skill, maritime knowledge, and political coordination. Convoys could number dozens of ships, each carrying tens of millions in modern value treasure, and the loss of even one ship could ripple across continents. Cargo loading was a meticulous operation. Silver coins were counted, stamped, and stacked in reinforced chests. Gold bars were secured and recorded. Cacao, indigo, pearls, and textiles were packed to prevent damage during months at sea. Every chest, bag, and crate was catalogued and accounted for, because even a small discrepancy could signal theft, error, or disaster. The stakes were immense. These shipments represented the wealth of entire regions, the salaries of officers and soldiers, and the political power of a global empire. A ship lost to a storm or attack was not merely a financial loss. It was a blow to Spain's authority and influence. Despite their preparation, the galleons faced the same immutable dangers that had claimed ships for centuries. Hurricanes in the Caribbean, sudden squalls in the Atlantic, hidden reefs near the Florida Keys or the Bahamas, any of these could destroy a fleet. Knowledge passed down from previous voyages informed captains, yet the ocean remained unpredictable. The wealth they carried made them targets for pirates, privateers, and rival nations, forcing fleets to sail in tight formations with cannons ready and men at stations. A well-constructed galleon was strong, but its strength was tested daily by nature, man, and circumstance. Even in calm waters, the galleons were floating microcosms of empire. Orders passed down from crown officials governed the loading, sailing, and guarding of treasure. Officers enforced discipline with strict codes of conduct, while sailors and soldiers followed routines that balanced labor with vigilance. The galleons were self-contained worlds, with medical care, kitchens, sleeping quarters, and armories compressed into decks that swayed endlessly beneath the sky. The balance between efficiency and danger was precarious, and the line between order and chaos was thinner than the planks underfoot. The construction and preparation of the fleet reveal why Spanish treasure ships captured the imagination of generations. These were vessels designed to withstand hurricanes, carry fortunes, and project power, yet they were still at the mercy of human error, misfortune, and the sea itself. Each galleon was a technological marvel, a floating fortress, and a testament to the empire's ambition. But above all, they were fragile when measured against nature and greed, and their vulnerability would soon become legendary as fleets vanished beneath the waves. The story of the Spanish galleons is not merely one of engineering or military might. It is a story of vision, risk, and obsession. They were instruments of empire, the backbone of a global economy, and the lifeline connecting colonies to crown. They carried not only treasure, but the hopes and fears of a world expanding across oceans, where fortunes were made and lost in months, and lives could be extinguished in moments. The galleons were living monuments to ambition, human ingenuity, and the ocean's indifferent power, and they would soon be tested in ways that would immortalize their names in history. As the ships were readied for departure, the Atlantic awaited with storms, reefs, and enemies, both human and natural. Silver and gold rested in the holds, stacked and catalogued, while sailors climbed rigging, polished cannons, and murmured prayers to saints carved into figureheads. The galleons were complete, magnificent, and deadly serious in their purpose. They were ready to sail not just as vessels of transport, but as embodiments of an empire that believed wealth could conquer both sea and sky. Yet even their strength and preparation could not alter one truth: the ocean answers to no crown, and in time, these marvels of Spanish engineering would face trials that would define their legacy forever. The silver that filled the holds of Spanish treasure fleets did not simply appear. It was extracted at the edge of the world through labor, ambition, and often unimaginable human cost. High in the Andes, at mines like Potosi in present-day Bolivia, men worked in conditions that defy belief. The mountain itself was nicknamed the Mountain of Silver, and in truth, it seemed almost alive, groaning under the weight of extraction. Miners descended into tunnels where oxygen was thin, blasting rock with primitive explosives, and hauling ore in baskets that could weigh hundreds of pounds. Many fell victim to cave-ins, mercury poisoning from refining processes, or sheer exhaustion. Despite these dangers, the output of silver was staggering. In its first decades, Potosi alone produced over 60,000 tons of silver, much of it destined to flow across the Atlantic to finance Spain's empire and Europe's wars. Transportation of this silver was a feat of logistical genius and peril. Ore was crushed, smelted, and minted into bars or coins before leaving the mountains. From there, it traveled across treacherous mountain roads on the backs of mules, through rivers swollen by seasonal rains, and into colonial hubs such as Lima and Veracruz. Every stage of this journey was fraught with danger. Indigenous workers, African slaves, and Spanish overseers alike faced theft, rebellion, disease, and accident. The human cost was enormous, but the empire demanded results. Each ton of silver moving toward the coast represented the projection of Spanish power and the extraction of wealth that would fuel global ambition. By the time the silver reached ports like Havana, it had already passed through a series of human dramas. Merchants meticulously recorded the quantity and quality of the metal. Officers checked for theft and authenticity. Guards ensured that no bar or coin disappeared into the hands of pirates or corrupt officials. Even small errors could create chaos. A missing shipment could delay fleet departure, undermine trust in the crown, or provoke legal disputes spanning continents. The silver was not just currency, it was a tangible measure of empire, a physical manifestation of Spain's authority and reach. The silver highway across the Atlantic was both literal and symbolic. The route stretched from the Caribbean across the Gulf Stream, skirting the Bahamas and aiming for the Spanish coast, usually landing in Seville or Cadiz. Timing was everything. The treasure fleet sailed in convoys during the calmer months to minimize hurricane risk, carrying silver, gold, and other colonial riches. Alongside the wealth traveled soldiers, administrators, sailors, and priests, creating a floating microcosm of the empire itself. Each ship was a repository of wealth, authority, and human ambition, and together the fleet represented one of the most concentrated flows of wealth ever attempted in history. The silver did more than fill the royal coffers. It reshaped economies across continents. European markets were flooded with New World metal, altering trade balances, fueling wars, and driving inflation in some regions. Countries that lacked access to this silver had to negotiate, trade, or fight to acquire it, and the resulting tensions shaped centuries of diplomacy and conflict. The flow of silver connected the Americas, Spain, Europe, and even Asia, particularly through trade with the Philippines and China, where silver was exchanged for silk, porcelain, and spices. This interconnectedness made the Silver Highway not just an economic corridor, but the backbone of a global empire. The logistics of moving this wealth were mind-boggling. A typical treasure fleet might carry millions of pesos in silver, each bar carefully weighed and catalogued. Officers guarded the shipment, recording serial numbers and mint marks, ensuring traceability. The security protocols were as elaborate as those of modern banks: armed escorts, designated routes, convoys traveling in formation, and rigorous inspections before departure. The stakes were immense. One ship lost to hurricane, piracy, or misnavigation could represent an economic catastrophe equivalent to billions today. These convoys became legendary, both for their riches and for the disasters that sometimes claimed them. Pirates and privateers were intimately familiar with the Silver Highway. English, Dutch, and French corsairs understood the pattern of Spanish shipments, the timing of convoys, and the vulnerabilities of even the most well-armed fleets. Sir Francis Drake famously intercepted treasure convoys, seizing silver and gold that would alter the balance of power in Europe. Attackers did not simply seek coins. They sought to undermine Spanish authority, enrich themselves, and disrupt global trade. The threat of piracy shaped fleet tactics, requiring convoy formation, armed escorts, and constant vigilance from officers and crew alike. The Atlantic Ocean itself became a central actor in this drama. Hurricanes could wipe out entire convoys, sinking ships that carried fortunes equivalent to the annual revenues of European kingdoms. Reefs and shoals, often uncharted or shifting with the tides, claimed vessels with shocking regularity. Navigators relied on celestial charts, rudimentary compasses, and accumulated knowledge, yet no level of preparation could guarantee safety. The ocean demanded respect, and the Silver Highway was as much a gamble with nature as it was a measure of human ambition. Even within the fleet, the movement of silver required careful planning. Heavy bars were stored low in the hold to maintain stability. Coin chests were fastened and sometimes chained to prevent theft. Fragile items such as fine textiles or porcelain were layered carefully above. Every galleon had its own officer responsible for overseeing cargo, documenting its condition, and protecting it from both human and natural threats. This attention to detail reflected the immense stakes, Spain's power, the empire's economy, and the lives of all aboard the ships depended on the careful transport of silver. The human dimension of the Silver Highway cannot be overstated. Miners, sailors, soldiers, and administrators were caught in a network that spanned continents. Indigenous workers in the mines faced harsh quotas, brutal discipline, and exposure to mercury during silver refinement. Slaves from Africa endured forced labor and dangerous conditions. Sailors on the galleons lived in cramped quarters, constantly threatened by disease, malnutrition, and the violence of the sea. Every ingot of silver was thus inseparable from the toil, suffering, and endurance of the people who produced, transported, and protected it. The treasure fleets were monuments to human ambition, but also to human cost. The Silver Highway also shaped the culture and politics of Spain. Seville, Cadiz, and Havana became hubs of wealth, population, and bureaucracy. Spanish nobles and merchants grew rich from their shares of trade, investing in land, art, and military ventures. The crown relied on silver to fund wars across Europe, finance naval operations, and maintain authority over far-flung colonies. The flow of wealth also encouraged corruption, smuggling, and exploitation, as individuals sought to divert even a fraction of the treasure into personal hands. The Silver Highway was thus a system of enormous power and opportunity, but one that demanded constant oversight and vigilance. The importance of silver extended beyond Europe. Much of it was eventually exchanged in the Manila galleons for Chinese silk, porcelain, and luxury goods, creating a trade network that connected the Americas, Asia, and Europe long before the modern global economy. Spanish silver became a medium of global commerce, circulating in markets from Canton to London, and influencing prices, currency systems, and political relations worldwide. The treasure fleets were not just vessels of wealth. They were instruments of economic diplomacy, projecting Spain's influence across continents. Yet despite meticulous planning, the Silver Highway remained perilous. Hurricanes claimed entire fleets, as in the infamous 1622 disaster off the coast of Florida, when dozens of ships sank, drowning hundreds and burying treasure beneath the waves. Pirates and privateers seized opportunities when fleets were scattered or damaged. Even minor navigational errors could result in shipwrecks along reefs or shoals. The Silver Highway was a test of human ingenuity, courage, and endurance, a high-stakes gamble where nature, piracy, and misfortune could wipe out decades of labor in an instant. The legacy of this highway is visible in both history and legend. Shipwrecks like the Nuestra Señora de Atocha, the San José, and countless lesser-known galleons lie beneath Caribbean waters, preserving the story of an empire, its wealth, and the human drama of its production. Coins, silver bars, artifacts, and personal effects recovered from these wrecks provide a window into the lives of miners, sailors, and officials, offering tangible evidence of a world built on ambition, exploitation, and global interconnection. The Silver Highway demonstrates the extraordinary complexity of Spain's empire. It was a system that spanned continents, integrated economies, required immense technological skill, and demanded human endurance on an unprecedented scale. The treasure fleets were not merely transport vessels, they were instruments of global power, floating representations of empire, and lifelines for the Spanish monarchy. Every voyage carried wealth, prestige, and human lives across a vast and dangerous ocean, a calculated negotiation between ambition and mortality. In the end, the Silver Highway was more than a route across the Atlantic. It was the spine of a global empire, a bridge between continents, and a corridor through which ambition, labor, risk, and fortune flowed. The galleons that carried this treasure embodied the best and worst of human ingenuity, remarkable engineering, meticulous planning, courage, and endurance, but also greed, exploitation, and the constant shadow of disaster. Beneath the waves, the remnants of this highway lie as eternal witnesses to an empire built on silver, ambition, and the relentless unpredictability of the ocean. The galleons of the Spanish treasure fleets were more than vessels. They were confined, floating worlds where life teetered between endurance and despair. Beneath the towering masts and reinforced decks, the daily reality of sailors, soldiers, and officers was governed by relentless labor, fear, and the constant presence of death. From the moment the fleet departed Havana or Veracruz, the ocean dictated every decision, every movement, and every risk. The galleons carried unimaginable treasure, but the cost was human lives, hundreds, sometimes thousands, compressed into narrow hulls and exposed to the full cruelty of the sea. Life began long before the sun rose. Sailors were roused from hammocks, often no more than slatted wooden platforms in crowded berths, and sent to perform tasks that were exhausting, dangerous, and unending. The air below deck was thick with sweat, smoke from cooking fires, the stench of unwashed bodies, and the tang of salt water seeping through the planks. Disease thrived in these conditions. Dysentery, scurvy, typhus, and malaria were constant companions, claiming more lives than storms or cannon fire. Fresh food was rare. Salt beef, dried fish, and hard biscuits formed the staple diet, supplemented by small quantities of fresh water that had to be rationed carefully. Hunger and thirst were routine punishments of the sea, and yet work never ceased. Sailors' tasks were physically demanding and relentless. They climbed rigging to adjust sails in high winds, hauled ropes that could strain muscles to their limit, and constantly maintained the ship's rigging, hull, and artillery. The galleon was an intricate machine, and every sailor was part of its functioning. A single misstep, loose rope, misadjusted sail, or improperly stowed cargo could imperil the ship and the treasure it carried. The decks were alive with movement, officers issuing orders, gunners polishing and loading cannons, soldiers keeping watch for pirates or mutiny, and sailors performing the endless labor of propulsion and maintenance. Each day was a delicate balance between survival and the demands of empire. Discipline aboard these ships was brutal, but considered necessary. Captains wielded near absolute authority, enforced through a combination of law, tradition, and fear. Flogging, confinement, and public humiliation were common punishments for infractions ranging from insubordination to theft. Soldiers and officers patrolled the decks, ensuring compliance, and the hierarchy was rigid. Orders from the captain or pilot were not merely suggestions. Disobedience could be fatal. Yet discipline was not only a tool of control, it was a mechanism of survival. In storms or battle, a disciplined crew could respond as one, maneuvering a vessel loaded with treasure and artillery with precision that separated survival from catastrophe. The psychological strain was as intense as the physical labor. Sailors faced months at sea with no reprieve, separated from family and familiar land, surrounded by the constant threat of death. Fear, anxiety, and isolation were ever present, amplified by the knowledge that the ship's wealth made it a target for both human and natural predators. Some men found solace in religion. Priests aboard the fleet conducted daily masses, offering comfort and absolution. Others turned to camaraderie, gambling, or storytelling to stave off despair. Yet the shadow of mortality was never far. A hurricane, disease outbreak, or enemy attack could kill dozens in a single day, leaving survivors to contend with grief, exhaustion, and the precarious responsibility of continuing the voyage. Soldiers and guards were equally tested. Their role was to defend the treasure against pirates and privateers, enforce order among the crew, and maintain readiness for combat at all times. They drilled constantly, loading and firing cannons, practicing coordinated maneuvers, and standing watch in all conditions. During storms, they fought both the sea and the weight of cannon recoil, a dual struggle between nature and warfare. Mutiny was a perpetual threat, especially among desperate or poorly treated sailors, requiring constant vigilance and swift, sometimes violent, action to maintain cohesion. The hierarchy aboard a treasure galleon extended to specialized roles that reflected the complexity of managing such wealth. Navigators relied on celestial charts, compasses, and experience to guide ships across the Atlantic. Pilots measured currents, winds, and distances, calculating routes that balanced speed with safety. Cargo officers meticulously inventoried silver, gold, and exotic goods, ensuring that every ingot, coin, and chest was accounted for. Each member of the crew had a role, and the survival of the ship, the treasure, and the men themselves depended on the seamless integration of these functions. Hygiene was minimal, a constant challenge that exacerbated disease. Crew members often went weeks without proper washing. Lice, rats, and vermin were widespread. The holds, packed with cargo and barely ventilated, became breeding grounds for infection. Medical care was rudimentary. Ship surgeons carried only basic tools and remedies, treating wounds, fevers, and scurvy with limited knowledge and resources. Death was omnipresent, and burial at sea was a frequent, grim necessity. Sailors were lowered into the ocean in weighted shrouds, a stark reminder of the ocean's power and the fragility of life aboard a treasure fleet. Social dynamics were equally complex. Officers and soldiers lived separately from the general crew, with privileges reflecting rank and responsibility. Sailors were divided by skill, experience, and sometimes origin, with tensions often flaring over pay, rations, or treatment. Language barriers, cultural differences, and personal ambition created friction in a confined environment. Yet these men had to cooperate under extreme stress, performing labor, maintaining order, and responding to emergencies with precision. The success or failure of the voyage depended on this fragile equilibrium. Religious devotion played a crucial role in daily life. Priests conducted masses, delivered sermons, and offered guidance during crises. Sailors and soldiers prayed for protection, guidance, and mercy, often in the face of storms that seemed divine in their fury. Figureheads carved into the bows of galleons represented saints or religious symbols, a visible reminder of divine oversight. Superstition mingled with faith. Sailors carried charms, observed omens, and treated unusual natural phenomena as messages or warnings. Faith, ritual, and superstition were as essential as rigging and sails, sustaining morale amid the endless dangers of the sea. Food and water management was a constant concern. Long voyages depleted fresh provisions, forcing reliance on salted meat, hard biscuits, and occasionally spoiled water. Rations were strictly monitored, and theft or waste could result in punishment. Hunger weakened men physically and psychologically, amplifying the risks posed by storms, disease, and conflict. Captains had to balance the necessities of survival with the constraints of limited storage and the burden of precious cargo, a tension that shaped both the voyage and the lives of everyone aboard. Storms were moments when daily life transformed into a struggle for survival. Gales and hurricanes could twist masts, rip sails, and flood decks within minutes. The crew battled waves that crashed over the bow, threatening to sweep men into the Atlantic. Cannons and cargo had to be secured, hatches and ropes adjusted. All hands worked together to maintain stability. Even with training and preparation, these events often claimed lives, damaged ships, and altered the course of the voyage. Survival demanded courage, endurance, and a constant awareness of both the sea and the human limitations of those aboard. Piracy was never far from the minds of sailors. The wealth aboard the galleons made them irresistible targets for corsairs, privateers, and rival nations. Lookouts scanned horizons constantly, prepared to signal an approaching threat. Soldiers manned the cannons, while sailors assisted with maneuvering and defense. The psychological pressure of knowing that enemy ships could appear at any moment heightened tension, creating a perpetual state of alertness. Engagements with pirates were violent, unpredictable, and often deadly, emphasizing that life aboard the treasure fleets was a blend of labor, vigilance, and fear. Despite hardships, the galleons were marvels of human coordination and endurance. Sailors developed routines to manage fatigue, maintain equipment, and perform essential tasks. Hierarchy, discipline, and shared purpose allowed these ships to traverse thousands of miles of open ocean, carrying treasure that could influence nations. The interplay of human skill, leadership, and resilience created a delicate equilibrium where disaster could strike at any moment, yet survival remained possible through preparation, courage, and cooperation. The treasure fleets, with their silver, gold, and exotic cargo, were not only vessels of commerce, but vessels of human drama. Each ingot, coin, and artifact represented labor, ambition, and risk. Each sailor, soldier, and officer carried hope, fear, and the burden of survival. Together, they formed a floating empire, a microcosm of Spain's power and the perils inherent in transporting wealth across the world's most dangerous ocean. The galleons were alive with the interplay of danger, discipline, faith, and ambition, and life aboard them remained a constant negotiation between human will and the formidable power of nature. In the end, the daily existence aboard a treasure galleon was a test of endurance, courage, and adaptability. The wealth in the hold, the orders of the captain, the skill of the crew, and the fury of the ocean intersected constantly, creating a high-stakes environment where survival was uncertain and every action mattered. Sailors endured storms, disease, hunger, and fear. Soldiers maintained discipline and vigilance. Officers navigated treacherous waters. And above all, the treasure waited below deck, a silent motivator, a symbol of ambition, and a prize worth risking life and soul. The glitter of Spanish treasure fleets drew more than admiration. It drew danger, envy, and relentless predation. Across the Atlantic and Caribbean, the wealth of the New World was a siren song for those willing to risk death to claim it. Pirates and privateers, sometimes indistinguishable from one another, were the constant shadow trailing the galleons. They were men who lived on the edges of legality, their ambition fueled by opportunity, courage, and greed. To encounter a pirate was to face a deadly gamble. A single engagement could mean capture, mutilation, or death, while victory offered unimaginable wealth. Pirates were not the romanticized figures of later legend. They were skilled, ruthless, and often brutal. Men like Sir Francis Drake, Henry Morgan, and Lawrence de Graaf honed their craft with precision, intelligence, and audacity. Drake, commissioned by the English crown as a privateer, understood that intercepting treasure fleets could deliver both personal fortune and political advantage. He transformed the seas into a theater of war, striking Spanish convoys with speed, deception, and strategy. These men were masters of naval tactics, exploiting weaknesses in formation, timing attacks when fleets were scattered, and using knowledge of currents, reefs, and winds to their advantage. Privateers operated under the protection of governments, legally sanctioned to plunder enemy ships during wartime. Pirates, by contrast, were often rogue actors, motivated purely by profit and willing to strike indiscriminately, yet both relied on similar strategies: intelligence gathering, surprise, intimidation, and overwhelming firepower. Letters of marque issued by rival European monarchs blurred the line between lawful and criminal, making the seas a treacherous chessboard where treasure fleets were the king, and every privateer sought to capture, cripple, or destroy them. Spanish treasure fleets responded with calculated defenses. Convoys were assembled, sometimes numbering dozens of ships, heavily armed and accompanied by smaller escort vessels designed to fend off attacks. Cannons lined the decks, while soldiers and sailors trained to repel boarding attempts or respond to long-range fire. Fleets sailed in disciplined formations, maintaining visual contact and mutual support. Captains coordinated with naval officers in both the Americas and Spain, sharing information about previous pirate activity, storm patterns, and navigational hazards. The coordination required precision, communication, and unwavering discipline, for even a single lapse could expose a galleon carrying millions of pesos in silver to disaster. Pirates relied on cunning, patience, and opportunism. They monitored the schedules of fleets, studied harbor departures, and intercepted ships where geography favored ambush. Narrow straits, shallow bays, and coral reefs could be exploited to trap or isolate a galleon. Attackers often preferred night raids or fog-covered approaches, using stealth to maximize surprise. When battle erupted, it was swift, brutal, and terrifying. Cannons thundered across decks, splintering wood and hurling iron through sails and hulls. Muskets cracked, swords clashed, and shouting filled the air. The fight was a violent contest of skill, courage, and desperation, with treasure as the ultimate prize and death a constant possibility. The psychological impact on crews of treasure fleets was profound. Sailors and soldiers lived under the perpetual threat of attack, knowing that pirates could appear without warning. Watch rotations were maintained around the clock, with lookouts scanning the horizon, their eyes straining against sun glare or darkness. Every shadow on the water, every unexpected sail could signal an imminent battle. Fear was an ever-present companion, heightened by the knowledge that a single misstep, dropping a cannon, misfiring a musket, or allowing a pirate to board, could cost lives and treasure alike. Pirates understood the value of terror as a weapon. The sight of a smaller, faster ship approaching the heavily laden galleon was designed to unnerve crews. Pirates shouted demands, fired warning shots, and attempted to exploit any sign of hesitation. If initial intimidation failed, they closed in with boarding parties, often swinging across rigging or planks extended between ships. Combat in such moments was chaotic, close quarters, and deadly. Sailors fought not just for treasure, but for survival, their skills, reflexes, and courage determining who would live to see another sunrise. Despite these dangers, some sailors sought fame or profit through privateering themselves. Enlisting under foreign flags, they joined raids against Spanish fleets, seizing opportunities to capture silver and gold. This blurred allegiance and loyalty, with men sometimes switching sides depending on fortune and circumstance. European powers viewed such actions as strategic warfare, a way to weaken Spain economically while enriching themselves and their nations. Treasure fleets were thus both targets and catalysts, shaping international conflicts and fueling centuries of maritime rivalry. The sheer scale of attacks on Spanish fleets was staggering. Histories record engagements in which multiple ships were captured, silver bars and coins looted, and entire crews killed or imprisoned. In some cases, fleets were caught unawares, scattered by storms or misnavigation, and vulnerable to concentrated pirate strikes. Pirates operated with intelligence networks, spies, and informants, tracking fleet departures from Havana or Veracruz. Knowledge of seasonal wind patterns, hurricane risks, and the fleet's schedule provided strategic advantage. The sea itself became both battlefield and ally, with currents, reefs, and weather shaping every confrontation. Privateers often demonstrated remarkable ingenuity. They disguised their vessels, used false flags to approach treasure ships undetected, and exploited the rigidity of convoy formations. Spanish captains, aware of these tactics, emphasized constant vigilance and strategic routing. Convoys adjusted formations to shield weaker ships, cannons were trained on likely approaches, and signaling systems were developed to communicate under attack. The interplay of strategy and improvisation defined these encounters, with every move potentially decisive. Famous engagements became legendary for their audacity and consequences. Sir Francis Drake's raids, for instance, not only captured treasure, but inflicted psychological and political damage, demonstrating that no galleon, however well armed, was invulnerable. Pirates like Lawrence de Graaf leveraged knowledge of Caribbean geography to launch coordinated attacks on isolated or damaged vessels. The reputations of captains, crews, and fleets were shaped by these encounters, influencing decisions in ports thousands of miles away. Every treasure fleet carried the weight of potential glory or ruin, a constant reminder that wealth alone could not guarantee survival. The human cost of these attacks was immense. Crew members were killed, captured, or enslaved. Captured officers and sailors could face imprisonment in distant ports, while survivors endured trauma, disease, and the loss of comrades. The stakes extended beyond the personal. A lost ship or stolen cargo could undermine imperial finances, delay wages, and disrupt supply lines. The sea was indiscriminate, and the combination of pirate cunning, human error, and environmental hazards made treasure fleets a high-stakes endeavor at every level. The presence of pirates and privateers also reinforced the necessity of discipline and hierarchy aboard the galleons. Officers enforced training, assigned watch rotations, and drilled crews in both navigation and combat. Coordination during battle was essential, as a single miscommunication could result in disaster. Sailors had to understand both their labor and their weaponry, managing rigging, sails, and artillery simultaneously. The interdependence of skill and discipline was vital. The survival of men, ships, and treasure relied on the seamless execution of orders in moments when chaos threatened to dominate. Yet pirates and privateers were not merely enemies. They were part of the legend and allure of the treasure fleets. Their exploits inspired fear, admiration, and obsession. Maps of lost galleons, rumored caches of gold, and tales of cunning raids spread quickly, fueling the imagination of sailors, merchants, and future treasure hunters alike. The encounters with these men of fortune elevated the fleets from mere logistical operations to theaters of drama, ambition, and mortality, where every crossing of the Atlantic became a story of risk, ingenuity, and courage. Even today, the legacy of piracy and privateering continues to shape our understanding of Spanish treasure fleets. Shipwrecks discovered off the coast of Florida, the Caribbean, and Central America testify not only to hurricanes and storms, but also to attacks, sabotage, and desperate defense. Coins, cannonballs, weapons, and personal artifacts reveal the intensity of these engagements, offering a vivid glimpse into lives constantly under threat. Each wreck is a frozen tableau of confrontation, a testament to human daring and the omnipresent danger of wealth at sea. The narrative of pirates and privateers demonstrates that treasure fleets were never isolated journeys. They were part of a complex geopolitical system where wealth, power, and violence intersected across oceans. The fleets carried the ambitions of an empire, the hopes of sailors, and the predatory instincts of pirates, all constrained by the unforgiving reality of nature. Success demanded preparation, courage, and a measure of luck. Failure could mean the loss of lives, treasure, and reputation. The Atlantic, with its storms, reefs, and currents, became a silent participant in every encounter, indifferent yet decisive. In essence, the treasure fleets were not merely moving wealth. They were arenas of human drama, a continuous interplay of power, skill, greed, and mortality. Every engagement with pirates or privateers amplified the stakes, reminding those aboard that no amount of planning or fortification could eliminate risk entirely. Discipline, training, courage, and resilience were as valuable as silver or gold, determining whether a voyage would end in triumph or catastrophe. The story of piracy is inseparable from the story of the treasure fleets, and together they define one of the most perilous and captivating chapters in maritime history. The Atlantic Ocean was as much an adversary to the Spanish treasure fleets as pirates or rival nations. For centuries, it remained a vast, untamed expanse where wealth, ambition, and human endurance were tested against currents, storms, reefs, and unpredictable winds. The very sea that allowed Spain to project its empire also claimed countless ships, their treasure swallowed beneath the waves and their crews lost to history. No galleon, regardless of fortification, discipline, or escort, could fully escape the capricious fury of the Atlantic. Navigation was the thin line separating fortune from catastrophe, a delicate balance of skill, knowledge, and luck. The art of navigation in the 16th and 17th centuries was a complex interplay of science, observation, and experience. Celestial navigation was the primary method, requiring sailors to read the stars, sun, and horizon to determine latitude. Instruments like the astrolabe, cross-staff, and later the backstaff allowed pilots to measure angles and calculate positions, but even minor errors could result in disaster. Longitude remained a nearly unsolvable problem for decades, leaving captains to rely on dead reckoning, estimating speed, direction, and time over vast distances. Even small miscalculations could mean the difference between safe passage and a shipwreck on hidden reefs. Currents and tides were both allies and enemies. The Gulf Stream, a powerful Atlantic current, could accelerate travel for well-positioned ships, but could also push vessels off course, particularly when combined with wind and misjudged navigation. Shallow waters, sandbanks, and coral reefs near the Caribbean islands and the Florida coast were constant threats. Many galleons met their end, not in battle, but by striking reefs that lurked just beneath the surface, invisible until it was too late. The ocean demanded respect. One misjudged turn or poorly timed tack could irreparably damage a hull or leave a ship stranded and exposed. Hurricanes were the ultimate arbiter of life and death for the treasure fleets. Each year, from June to November, the Caribbean and Gulf of Mexico were dominated by violent tropical storms. Spanish captains timed departures carefully to avoid peak hurricane season, yet nature was unpredictable. A single hurricane could scatter an entire convoy, tossing galleons onto reefs or capsizing them in open water. Historical records recount disasters in which dozens of ships sank in a single storm, drowning thousands and burying treasure beyond reach. Hurricanes demanded not only courage, but extraordinary seamanship, requiring constant adjustments to sails, ballast, and course to ride out the fury of wind and wave. Reefs and shoals were merciless and unrelenting. The shallow waters off the Florida Keys, the Bahamas, and parts of the Caribbean were riddled with coral formations capable of slicing through hulls. Many galleons, heavily laden with treasure, drew too much water to maneuver quickly, leaving them vulnerable to these hidden killers. Pilots relied on local knowledge, charts, and soundings to avoid disaster, but the margin for error was razor thin. Even minor navigational mistakes could result in a ship running aground, leaving both treasure and crew at the mercy of waves, storms, and predators. Fog and sudden weather changes compounded the hazards. Caribbean weather could shift rapidly. Calm seas could give way to sudden squalls. Thick fog could obscure reefs, and winds could shift violently, leaving a fleet scattered and vulnerable. Sailors had to respond instantly, adjusting sails, pumping bilges, and securing cargo. Every decision mattered, for delays or miscalculations could lead to disaster, especially in convoys where one ship's error could endanger others. The sea was an active participant in every voyage, unpredictable and indifferent to human ambition. Navigational tools, while advanced for the time, had limits. Charts were often incomplete or inaccurate, particularly in distant waters where Spanish knowledge was based on prior voyages, hearsay, or observation. Pilots frequently relied on dead reckoning, which compounded errors over long distances. Coastal features, shifting sands, and uncharted shoals made approach to ports perilous. Even when arriving safely, ships faced additional dangers in harbor. Storms could drive vessels onto rocks, and crowded conditions increased the risk of collisions. Navigation was a constant test of judgment, skill, and endurance, a high-stakes endeavor where mistakes were often fatal. The human element of navigation was equally critical. Pilots and captains required immense experience, intuition, and calm under pressure. Decision-making could mean life or death for hundreds aboard. Each adjustment of course, each interpretation of stars or currents, carried consequences. Fatigue, illness, and the stress of leadership in a constantly dangerous environment could impair judgment. The lives of sailors and the security of treasure depended not only on instruments and charts, but on the competence and resilience of those at the helm. Storms and natural hazards also had economic consequences. A single shipwreck could destroy treasure worth millions, delay shipments, and disrupt trade networks. The loss of silver or gold had cascading effects. Merchants went unpaid, European economies fluctuated, and wars could be underfunded. Hurricanes and reefs did not discriminate. Their destruction was absolute. The natural world was a competitor as relentless as pirates, capable of undoing years of labor in moments, demonstrating that human ambition, no matter how meticulously planned, remained vulnerable to forces beyond control. Preparation against natural hazards was exhaustive. Ships were reinforced, cargo secured, and crews drilled in emergency procedures. Lookouts were posted to spot weather changes, reefs, or other hazards. Convoys maintained strict formations to protect weaker ships, coordinate navigation, and ensure mutual support. Yet even with the most meticulous planning, the unpredictability of the sea meant that risk could never be eliminated. Survival depended on skill, discipline, teamwork, and sometimes sheer luck. The psychological impact of natural danger was immense. Sailors endured months of anxiety, knowing that storms could destroy everything they had worked for, or everything they were trying to protect. Sleep was irregular, meals sparse, and vigilance constant. Fear was omnipresent. Fear of drowning, fear of being crushed by cargo, fear of disease, and fear of failure. Yet human resilience and ingenuity allowed crews to navigate these dangers, balancing the inevitability of risk with the necessity of progress. Disaster stories were common, and each shipwreck became a cautionary tale for the fleet. Entire convoys could be lost to hurricanes, as happened in the 1622 fleet off the Florida coast. Sailors recounted being tossed into the waves, clinging to wreckage, watching comrades swept away. Reefs claimed galleons despite skillful navigation, leaving treasure buried beneath coral and sand. The ocean's indifference was absolute. Wealth, rank, and preparation could not shield against its fury. These events became part of maritime lore, shaping tactics, ship design, and the timing of future voyages. Natural danger also intersected with human error. Miscalculations in navigation, overconfidence in ship handling, or failure to anticipate seasonal weather could exacerbate risk. Crews had to maintain constant communication, follow orders precisely, and anticipate contingencies. The interplay between human skill and natural hazard defined the survival of the treasure fleet. Every hurricane survived, every reef avoided, was a testament to discipline, knowledge, and courage. Every failure, a lesson written in the ocean's unforgiving ledger. Even when fleets survived storms and reefs, the journey was never secure. The Atlantic and Caribbean could be capricious. Sudden wind shifts, rogue waves, and unexpected currents could scatter ships, delay arrivals, and increase exposure to pirates or disease. Sailors learned to read the signs of the sea, anticipate changes in wind and tide, and react instantly. Experience, intuition, and coordination were invaluable, yet unpredictability remained the defining feature of life aboard a treasure fleet. Despite the dangers, these fleets sailed repeatedly, year after year, transporting silver, gold, and other riches from the Americas to Spain. Their successes and failures shaped the policies, strategies, and technologies of empire. Hurricanes inspired changes in ship design, better ballast systems, and reinforced hulls. Navigation techniques improved, celestial methods were refined, and knowledge of currents and shoals expanded. Each voyage contributed to a growing body of expertise, yet the ocean continued to assert itself as an unpredictable and often lethal opponent. The treasure fleets were, therefore, an extraordinary human achievement, a continuous negotiation with nature. They embodied the highest levels of skill, discipline, and engineering of the era, yet remained fundamentally at the mercy of the Atlantic. Storms, reefs, hurricanes, and unpredictable weather were ever-present threats, shaping every decision and demanding constant vigilance. The wealth aboard was immense, but it could not shield the men or vessels from the sea's wrath. Nature's power was both the ultimate adversary and the defining challenge of the treasure fleets, a reminder that even the mightiest empires were subject to forces beyond control. In the end, navigation and natural danger defined the limits of Spanish maritime ambition. The treasure fleets were symbols of empire, but they were also fragile constructions in a vast and unpredictable ocean. Skill, preparation, courage, and luck were all necessary for survival, yet none were guarantees. The ocean determined the fate of galleons, treasure, and crews alike. Hurricanes, reefs, and currents claimed their due relentlessly, reminding all who sailed that wealth and power could not conquer the sea, only endure it. The legacy of these hazards remains etched in history and preserved beneath the waves, where shipwrecks lie as silent witnesses to human ambition, resilience, and mortality. Somewhere beneath the turquoise waters of the Caribbean, beneath shifting sands and coral reefs, lie the silent remnants of Spain's most famous treasure fleets. These wrecks, buried by hurricanes, reefs, and human error, are monuments to ambition, wealth, and catastrophe. Among them, the names Nuestra Señora de Atocha, San José, and Flor de la Mar resonate through history, not just for the treasure they carried, but for the drama, mystery, and human cost that accompanied their demise. Each shipwreck is a frozen story of a world where wealth, danger, and human endeavor collided on a vast and unforgiving ocean. The Nuestra Señora de Atocha, part of the famed 1622 Tierra Firme fleet, is perhaps the most legendary of Spanish galleon wrecks. Laden with silver, gold, emeralds, and other treasures from the New World, the Atocha was a floating embodiment of empire. Its departure from Havana was routine, but the fleet faced one of the most merciless hurricanes ever recorded in the region. Winds howled, waves towered, and the galleons were thrown against each other, reefs, and the unforgiving currents of the Florida Straits. Over the course of the storm, dozens of ships sank, including the Atocha. Hundreds of men perished, their bodies claimed by the sea, along with the treasure that had been years in the making. The sinking of the Atocha left a mark on history that extended far beyond the immediate loss. It was not merely a shipwreck, it was a catastrophe that demonstrated the fragility of even the most formidable fleets against nature. The silver, gold, and emeralds in its hold were representative of entire regions of the Americas, extracted at great human cost from mines in Potosi, Zacatecas, and Cartagena. Its loss disrupted trade, delayed royal revenues, and became a cautionary tale for all subsequent treasure fleets. The Atocha was a vivid reminder that despite Spain's maritime power, the Atlantic was an indifferent, often lethal force. The San Jose, often referred to as the Holy Grail of shipwrecks, carries a story steeped in both history and legend. In 1708, the galleon departed from Portobello, Panama, carrying an immense cargo of gold, silver, and precious stones bound for Spain. Its journey was abruptly ended by a British naval attack in the waters near Cartagena. The ship sank with the majority of its crew and the staggering wealth aboard. For centuries, its location remained a mystery, fueling speculation, treasure hunting, and stories of curses. The San Jose was emblematic of the strategic importance of treasure fleets. Not only did they carry wealth, but they were also pawns in geopolitical conflict, caught between empires vying for dominance. The human drama surrounding the San Jose was as significant as the treasure itself. The crew faced not only the threat of enemy fire, but also the environmental hazards of the Caribbean, storms, strong currents, and reefs. Many men drowned in the attack or were captured by rival forces. The loss of life, combined with the economic impact of the treasure sinking to the depths, illustrates how intertwined human experience and imperial ambition were in the age of the galleons. The San Jose serves as a testament to the risks undertaken by crews, the stakes of global trade, and the unrelenting presence of mortality in the age of treasure fleets. The Flor de la Mar is another story etched into maritime history. Launched in 1502, it was one of the largest galleons of its time and participated in numerous expeditions, including voyages to the East Indies. Laden with treasure from the Sultanate of Malacca in 1511, it sank in 1512 off the coast of Sumatra during a storm. Its loss was catastrophic, not only for the treasure, but for Spain's reputation and its capacity to project power in Southeast Asia. The Flor de la Mar carried an enormous cargo of gold, jewels, and exotic goods, a tangible expression of Spain's global reach. Its sinking, like that of other galleons, underscores the interplay of ambition, human endeavor, and the natural world in determining the outcomes of empire. Shipwrecks, like the Atocha, San Jose, and Flor de la Mar, reveal more than the fate of treasure. They reveal the human cost of maritime empires. Sailors, soldiers, and officers often faced impossible odds. Hurricanes struck with no warning, enemy ships attacked without mercy, and reefs and shoals lay hidden beneath deceptively calm waters. The crews of these ships lived in a high-stakes environment where a single miscalculation could result in death and the loss of entire fortunes. Survivors were few, and the human stories of bravery, endurance, and despair remain embedded in the legacy of these wrecks. Recovering treasure from these wrecks has been a saga in itself. Modern exploration, using advanced diving technology and submersibles, has uncovered portions of cargo that remained lost for centuries. Coins, silver bars, gold ingots, emeralds, jewelry, and personal artifacts have emerged from the depths, revealing the scale and diversity of what these ships carried. Each recovered item tells a story. The labor in the mines, the meticulous documentation by officers, the dangers faced on the voyage, and the violent forces of nature that claimed the ship. The treasure is tangible proof of the convergence of human ambition, risk, and maritime skill. Yet shipwrecks are also archaeological time capsules, preserving not just treasure, but details of daily life aboard the fleets. Personal effects, tools, weaponry, and even remnants of food have been recovered, offering insight into the routines, hardships, and ingenuity of sailors. The design of the ships themselves, the organization of cargo holds, and the placement of cannons provide historians with a detailed understanding of naval engineering, logistics, and the strategies used to protect both wealth and life. Each wreck is a portal into a vanished world, frozen in time beneath the waves, where human ambition collided with the merciless forces of the sea. These famous wrecks also illuminate the economic and political impact of treasure fleets. The loss of a galleon carrying millions in silver and gold could delay royal revenues, disrupt trade, and alter the balance of power in Europe. For merchants and crown officials, a lost ship was a financial disaster. For rival nations, it could be a geopolitical advantage. The Atocha, San José, and Flor de la Mar demonstrate how the fates of individual ships were inseparable from global economic and political dynamics. Treasure fleets were more than maritime ventures. They were instruments of empire, where wealth, power, and human life were inextricably linked. The legacy of these wrecks endures in legend and lore. Stories of hidden treasure, cursed ships, and heroic survivors have permeated popular culture, inspiring treasure hunters, historians, and writers alike. Yet beyond the allure of gold and silver, these wrecks provide profound insight into the risks and realities of early modern maritime empires. They illustrate the fragile balance between human ambition and natural forces, the intersection of politics, economics, and warfare, and the enduring courage of those who sailed aboard the treasure fleets. Hurricanes, reefs, storms, and human error ensured that no treasure fleet was guaranteed safe passage. The survival of some ships and the loss of others highlight the precariousness of empire, the unpredictability of the sea, and the stakes involved in transporting wealth across thousands of miles of ocean. The wrecks themselves, now resting on the seafloor, are silent witnesses to centuries of human endeavor, ambition, and misfortune. They remind us that treasure fleets were living dramas, where fortune and disaster were always intertwined, and the ocean's power was absolute. The Atocha, San José, and Flor de la Mar are more than names in history. They are symbols. Symbols of ambition, of the human desire to conquer the sea, of the risks undertaken to transport wealth, and of the relentless power of nature. They teach us that for every galleon that reached port successfully, countless others never did, and that treasure was inseparable from the human and natural forces that shaped its journey. These wrecks define the limits of human endeavor, the costs of empire, and the enduring allure of the lost riches of the Spanish treasure fleets. In reflecting on these shipwrecks, one cannot ignore the stories of survival and heroism. Some sailors endured the fury of hurricanes for days, clinging to wreckage until rescued. Officers risked their lives to save cargo or crew. The survivors' tales offer vivid accounts of endurance, ingenuity, and despair, giving voice to the human dimension behind the treasure. Each wreck is thus a multi-layered narrative of wealth, of human suffering, of maritime skill, and of nature's indifferent power. Ultimately, the most famous wrecks of the Spanish treasure fleets represent the high stakes of empire on the seas. They illustrate the delicate interplay between human ambition, engineering prowess, natural hazards, and geopolitical conflict. The stories of the Atocha, San José, and Flor de la Mar capture the imagination not only because of treasure, but because they illuminate the extraordinary risks, sacrifices, and achievements of a world that spanned oceans, continents, and centuries. In their loss, these ships have secured a lasting legacy, a vivid, tangible testament to the drama, danger, and enduring fascination of the age of Spanish treasure fleets. The treasure fleets were not merely vessels of gold and silver, they were the lifeblood of an empire, the physical manifestation of Spain's global reach and economic power. Every ingot, coin, and chest of wealth carried across the Atlantic represented the labor of miners in the Americas, the risk endured by sailors, and the ambitions of monarchs in Europe. The economy of treasure was a complex global system connecting mines, ports, merchants, and markets in a network that reshaped continents, trade, and human society. Understanding this system is essential to grasp the true significance of Spain's treasure fleets, which were far more than maritime marvels. They were instruments of economic and political domination on a scale unprecedented in human history. At the heart of this system was silver. The vast mines of Piracy in present-day Bolivia and Zacatecas in Mexico produced immense quantities of metal, much of it destined for Europe. The extraction process was brutal. Indigenous laborers and African slaves toiled in extreme conditions, subjected to mercury during the refining process, crushing rock by hand and transporting ore over dangerous terrain. Despite these horrors, the output was staggering. In the early decades of the 17th century, Piracy alone produced over 60,000 tons of silver, a supply that would dominate global trade for centuries. Each bar of silver was a story of labor, danger, and ambition, carrying with it the human cost of empire. Silver from the Americas flowed primarily to Spain, arriving in Seville and Cadiz aboard the treasure fleets. Upon arrival, it fueled a remarkable transformation of European economies. Spain used silver to pay soldiers, fund wars, finance colonial administration, and maintain its position as a dominant European power. But the impact of this wealth was not confined to the Iberian Peninsula. European merchants, bankers, and governments were drawn into a vast circulation of precious metal, influencing credit systems, trade agreements, and even inflation rates. The price revolution of the 16th and 17th centuries, characterized by rising prices across Europe, was fueled largely by the influx of New World silver, illustrating the global economic consequences of treasure. The treasure fleets were also integral to the development of global trade networks. Spanish silver did not remain in Europe. It moved onward, often exchanged for Asian goods such as silk, porcelain, and spices in the Philippines. The Manila Galleons transported vast quantities of silver across the Pacific to Manila, where it entered the trade networks of China, Japan, and Southeast Asia. This flow of precious metal created a truly global economy, linking continents in a web of commerce that had never existed before. Silver became a universal currency, facilitating trade between cultures and empires separated by thousands of miles and multiple oceans. Gold, while less abundant than silver, played an equally critical role. Spanish colonies in the Americas produced immense quantities of gold from mines in Colombia, Peru, and Mexico. Gold coins and ingots were meticulously minted, inventoried, and transported alongside silver, providing liquidity and symbolizing wealth in a form that was universally recognized. Gold also served as a hedge against the volatility of markets, a tangible asset that could be used in diplomatic negotiations, military campaigns, or as a reserve for emergencies. The dual flow of silver and gold reinforced Spain's position as a global economic power, creating a foundation for imperial expansion, warfare, and diplomacy. The impact of treasure extended beyond economics. It influenced politics, social structures, and culture. In Spain, the wealth of the colonies funded monumental architectural projects, patronage of the arts, and military campaigns across Europe. Nobles and merchants, enriched by the flow of silver and gold, invested in land, titles, and influence, solidifying hierarchical social structures and consolidating power. At the same time, the influx of precious metal had destabilizing effects. Inflation eroded the value of wages and savings, while dependence on colonial wealth discouraged domestic economic innovation. Spain became both extraordinarily powerful and uniquely vulnerable, reliant on treasure fleets to sustain its empire. The treasure fleets themselves were engines of economic coordination. Each convoy carried carefully documented cargoes, with officers meticulously recording the quantity and quality of silver, gold, and other goods. Cargo manifests detailed every ingot, coin, emerald, and exotic product, providing accountability and traceability across oceans. Security was paramount. Armed escorts, strict convoy formations, and vigilance against piracy were essential to prevent losses. Even small thefts or miscalculations could have far-reaching consequences, affecting merchants, the crown, and global trade networks. The economy of treasure was therefore not just about extraction and transport. It was a sophisticated system of logistics, risk management, and financial oversight. The treasure fleets also influence international relations and conflict. Rival European powers, England, France, and the Netherlands, understood that intercepting Spanish treasure could weaken Spain economically and enhance their own positions. Privateering and piracy became strategic tools, sanctioned by letters of marque or undertaken independently, aimed at diverting wealth and undermining Spanish dominance. Wars were fought with the wealth carried by these fleets. Campaigns in Flanders, Italy, and the Netherlands were financed in large part by the silver and gold from the Americas. Treasure was not just wealth. It was a weapon, a tool of policy, and a symbol of power in the geopolitical chessboard of early modern Europe. The human cost of this economic system was immense. Mining, transport, and protection of treasure relied on thousands of individuals exposed to danger, exploitation, and mortality. Indigenous laborers, African slaves, sailors, and soldiers were the engine of empire, often bearing the brunt of risk and labor while the benefits flowed to distant elites. Shipwrecks, hurricanes, piracy, and disease claimed lives on a massive scale, reminding all that wealth was inseparable from risk. Each coin or ingot carried not just economic value, but the imprint of human struggle, endurance, and sacrifice. Merchants, bankers, and financiers played crucial roles in maximizing the utility of treasure. Upon arrival in Europe, silver and gold were often exchanged, loaned, or invested in ventures across the continent. Banking networks in Antwerp, Genoa, and Amsterdam facilitated the movement of currency, extending the reach of treasure beyond Spain. Merchants leveraged their access to colonial wealth to fund trade, negotiate contracts, and influence politics. Treasure fleets were therefore nodes in a vast, interconnected economic system, linking the Americas, Europe, and Asia in a network of wealth, credit, and commerce that underpinned the early modern world. The circulation of treasure also shaped global commerce. Spain's silver enabled the purchase of Chinese silks and porcelain, Japanese silver, and Southeast Asian spices, creating a flow of goods and wealth that connected continents. European economies, from England to the Netherlands, were affected by inflation, liquidity, and trade imbalances linked to Spanish bullion. Local economies in the Americas were transformed as mining towns, ports, and supply networks emerged to support the extraction and shipment of treasure. The economic impact of treasure was therefore multifaceted, influencing local, regional, and global systems simultaneously. Despite its wealth, the treasure economy had vulnerabilities. Spain's dependence on silver and gold from the Americas created a brittle system sensitive to storms, shipwrecks, piracy, and political unrest. Losses at sea could delay revenue, disrupt markets, and weaken Spain's position in Europe. Colonial uprisings, labor shortages, and disease could reduce output from mines, while mismanagement or corruption siphoned wealth away from the crown. The economy of treasure was both a source of power and a potential liability, reflecting the precarious balance between wealth, risk, and human endeavor. Treasure fleets also influenced technological and logistical development. Shipbuilding, navigation, cargo management, and defensive tactics evolved in response to the demands of transporting immense wealth across hostile oceans. The need to protect treasure led to innovations in armament, convoy formation, and port infrastructure. Banking, accounting, and documentation methods were refined to track and secure shipments. In essence, the Spanish treasure fleets were both a consequence and a driver of economic, technological, and organizational advancement, shaping the capabilities of empire in multiple dimensions. Ultimately, the economy of treasure was a story of ambition, human ingenuity, and global interconnection. Silver and gold moved from mines in the Americas to European markets, then across Asia, influencing trade, finance, politics, and culture on a planetary scale. The treasure fleets were the arteries of this system, linking distant regions through risk, labor, and maritime skill. Each voyage was a microcosm of empire, a high-stakes negotiation between human effort, natural hazards, and economic opportunity. Wealth was not merely carried, it was produced, protected, and circulated with immense skill and profound human cost. The impact of treasure extended well beyond immediate monetary value. It reshaped social hierarchies, funded wars, influenced diplomacy, and created global trade networks that persisted for centuries. It tied the Americas, Europe, and Asia together in a shared economic system, making the Spanish Empire a central node in the early modern world. The treasure fleets, through their wealth, danger, and ambition, were the vessels through which the economy of empire flowed, shaping the world in ways that are still visible today. In the end, the economy of treasure was more than money in transit. It was a system of human labor, maritime skill, political power, and global commerce. The wealth carried aboard the treasure fleets was inseparable from the dangers faced by crews, the strategic calculations of monarchs, and the economic networks that linked continents. Understanding this economy illuminates not only the purpose of the fleets, but also the extraordinary scale and complexity of Spain's empire, the interconnectedness of early modern trade, and the enduring human stories embedded in silver gold and the treasures of the New World. While the Spanish treasure fleets are most famously associated with the Atlantic, a parallel system of wealth and peril stretched across the Pacific, connecting the Americas to Asia. These were the Manila Galleons, massive ships that sailed from Acapulco, Mexico, to Manila in the Philippines, carrying silver from the New World in exchange for Asian goods. For over 2.5 centuries, these galleons established one of the earliest global trade networks, linking continents, economies, and cultures in ways previously unimaginable. The Manila galleons carried the lifeblood of empire: precious metals, spices, silk, porcelain, and other exotic commodities, while their crews navigated one of the most dangerous maritime routes in human history. The journey of a Manila galleon was arduous, demanding, and perilous. From the port of Acapulco, silver ingots were loaded alongside goods bound for Asia: cochineal dye, fine textiles, and provisions to sustain months at sea. The ships then set sail into the Pacific, crossing thousands of miles of open ocean, reliant on monsoon winds, and the skill of pilots who charted a path through largely uncharted waters. Navigation required the precise calculation of latitude, observation of stars, and understanding of wind patterns, as longitude remained difficult to determine accurately. Any miscalculation could leave a galleon adrift, far from land, or driven into treacherous reefs along the Philippine archipelago. The Pacific was a theater of danger as relentless as the Atlantic. Storms could arise without warning, waves reaching unimaginable heights, Hurricanes and typhoons struck with devastating force, and the galleons, laden with treasure and provisions, were slow to maneuver. The crews endured months of limited food and water, cramped conditions, and disease. Scurvy, dysentery, and fever were constant companions, exacerbated by the confined and unsanitary conditions aboard the ship. The human cost of these voyages was high, with deaths common even in the absence of storms or piracy. Sailors had to maintain vigilance, discipline, and courage to survive, knowing that the ocean was as deadly as any enemy. The treasure carried by these ships was staggering in both quantity and value. Silver mined from Piracy and Zacatecas, refined and shaped into bars and coins, was the primary cargo. This silver fueled the Asian trade, becoming the currency that allowed Spain to purchase silks from China, spices from the Spice Islands, porcelain, ceramics, and other luxurious goods. The Manila galleons transformed global trade by introducing vast quantities of American silver into Asia, where it was highly prized and became a medium of exchange in Chinese markets. Without these galleons, the intercontinental flow of wealth and goods that defined the early modern economy would have been impossible. The cultural impact of the Manila galleons was profound. Goods transported across the Pacific were not merely commodities, they were symbols of status, wealth, and power. Chinese silk adorned Spanish nobles, Japanese silver financed European trade ventures, and exotic spices reshaped culinary traditions across the globe. These goods carried the imprints of multiple civilizations, blending the material cultures of Asia and the Americas in the households of Europe. The galleons were therefore not just economic instruments, but vessels of cultural transmission, connecting distant worlds in ways that left lasting legacies. Piracy was also a significant threat in the Pacific. Privateers from England and the Netherlands, aware of the immense value of the galleon's cargo, sought opportunities to capture or destroy these vessels. The galleon's slow speed and predictable routes made them vulnerable to attack. In response, Spanish authorities fortified ships, armed them heavily, and employed convoy systems whenever possible. Nevertheless, encounters with pirates were common, and every voyage carried the risk of loss of life and treasure. The Pacific, though vast and remote, was never free from human predation. The route itself required extraordinary skill and preparation. The return voyage from Manila to Acapulco relied on the Kuroshio current and the Pacific trade winds. Captains had to navigate carefully to catch favorable winds while avoiding storms, reefs, and hostile waters. Stops at the Mariana Islands and other points were essential for resupply and navigation correction. Crews had to balance speed with safety, constantly adjusting sails and course in response to changing conditions. The success of the voyage depended on a delicate interplay of natural knowledge, technical skill, and disciplined execution by every member of the crew. The Manila galleons also influenced global economic systems. Silver arriving in Manila was exchanged for Asian goods, which were then transported to Spain via European intermediaries. This created a multi-continental trade network linking the Americas, Asia, and Europe. Chinese merchants, Spanish officials, and European financiers were all connected by the flow of silver and goods. The galleons thus played a pivotal role in the emergence of a truly global economy, establishing patterns of trade, credit, and currency circulation that shaped international commerce for centuries. Shipwrecks were a persistent hazard. Coral reefs, typhoons, and navigational errors claimed countless galleons, leaving treasure buried beneath the waves and sailors lost to history. The most famous wrecks, such as the San Diego, sunk off the coast of the Philippines in 1600, illustrate the dangers faced by these fleets. Such disasters were catastrophic not only for the crews, but also for the imperial economy. Each lost galleon represented months of labor, strategic planning, and immense monetary value, underscoring the high-stakes nature of maritime empire. The lives of sailors and officers aboard the Manila galleons were defined by endurance, hierarchy, and discipline. Sailors faced months at sea with minimal privacy, working tirelessly to maintain sails, rigging, and cargo security. Officers coordinated navigation, supervised labor, and ensured compliance with strict codes of conduct. Discipline was enforced through a combination of authority and ritual, with punishment for disobedience severe and immediate. Faith and superstition played significant roles in morale. Mass, prayers, and rituals were performed to seek divine protection from the perils of the sea. The social dynamics aboard these galleons were complex. Crews were diverse, including Spaniards, indigenous laborers, and enslaved Africans. Hierarchies were rigid, but cooperation was essential. Tasks required precise timing and coordination, particularly during storms or emergencies. The human element was critical. Even minor errors in communication or execution could result in disaster. Every member of the crew, from pilot to deckhand, was bound to the success of the voyage and the safety of the treasure, emphasizing the interplay between individual skill and collective effort. The Manila galleons also left a lasting geopolitical legacy. Spain's control over these trade routes allowed it to dominate Pacific commerce for over 2 centuries, establishing Manila as a hub of global exchange. European rivals continually sought to intercept or disrupt this trade, leading to naval engagements and strategic competition. The galleons were not merely commercial vessels. They were instruments of imperial policy, projecting Spanish power across oceans and ensuring the flow of wealth necessary to sustain its global empire. The treasures themselves were symbols of empire, but also agents of cultural exchange. Silver was transformed into currency in Asia, facilitating trade with China, Japan, and Southeast Asia. Porcelain, silk, and spices returned to the Americas and Europe, introducing new tastes, technologies, and aesthetic forms. The Manila galleons were therefore agents of globalization, carrying wealth, culture, and knowledge across vast distances. They shaped the material and economic realities of continents, leaving a legacy that extends into the modern era. Ultimately, the Manila galleons represent the extraordinary reach and complexity of Spain's global empire. These ships were vessels of wealth, risk, and human endeavor, traversing one of the most challenging oceanic routes in history. They carried the labor of the Americas, the skills of European navigators, and the products of Asian civilizations across the Pacific. Each voyage was a microcosm of early modern globalization, a convergence of ambition, danger, economics, and culture. The galleon's legacy endures in the treasures recovered from shipwrecks, the records of trade, and the lasting impact on global commerce and cultural exchange. In the end, the Manila galleons were more than trade vessels. They were bridges between worlds, lifelines of empire, and symbols of human ingenuity confronting the vast, indifferent ocean. Their journeys reveal the interdependence of continents, the stakes of imperial ambition, and the enduring risks and rewards of maritime enterprise. The treasures they carried were tangible evidence of global interconnectedness, but they were inseparable from the storms, reefs, and human courage that defined every crossing. The Pacific, like the Atlantic, was both a conduit of wealth and a crucible of peril, shaping the fate of empires and the lives of those bold enough to traverse its immense expanse. Life aboard the Manila galleons was a study in endurance, discipline, and adaptation. These enormous vessels, some exceeding 1,500 tons, carried treasure, provisions, and hundreds of crew members across the vast Pacific, a journey that could last 6 months or more. On board, the human experience was defined by the rhythm of the sea, the demands of the ship, and the omnipresent risk of disaster. Every coin of silver, bale of silk, and cask of provisions had to be carefully managed, and the men who transported them lived lives of extreme labor, constant vigilance, and unrelenting monotony, punctuated by moments of terrifying crisis. A typical crew was highly stratified, reflecting the hierarchical structure of Spanish maritime society. At the top were the captain and pilots, responsible for navigation, command decisions, and the overall safety of the ship. Pilots were skilled in celestial navigation, chart reading, and the interpretation of currents and winds. Their expertise was critical, for the Pacific was a vast, largely uncharted expanse where a miscalculation in latitude or wind direction could leave a ship adrift for weeks, even months. Beneath them were officers, often drawn from the Spanish Navy or mercantile organizations, who oversaw daily operations, disciplined sailors, and coordinated labor. The majority of the crew consisted of sailors, laborers, and specialized artisans. Sailors handled the sails, rigging, and general maintenance of the ship. Laborers assisted with cargo, pumps, and other manual tasks essential for survival. Carpenters, caulkers, and blacksmiths were crucial for repairs, especially during storms or after encounters with reefs or enemy ships. Every member of the crew had a role that could mean life or death for the ship and the treasure aboard. The Manila galleons operated as tight, interdependent systems where failure by one individual could imperil hundreds. Discipline aboard the galleons was strict, often brutal, and necessary for survival. Sailors were subject to a code of conduct enforced by officers, with punishments ranging from floggings to confinement. Disobedience or negligence could result in the loss of life or treasure, and officers were tasked with ensuring compliance. The hierarchy was not merely a matter of authority, it was an operational necessity. Storms, navigation challenges, and potential pirate attacks required coordinated action, and any lapse could be catastrophic. Discipline was the thread holding together a fragile order amid the chaos of the open sea. Daily life was harsh and regimented. Sailors rose before dawn to work the sails, clean the decks, and prepare for the long day ahead. Meals were simple, often consisting of hardtack, salted meat, and occasionally dried fruits or beans. Water was rationed carefully, and the threat of scurvy loomed large due to the lack of fresh produce. Hygiene was minimal, confined by cramped conditions and the necessity of maintaining seaworthiness over comfort. Disease was a constant companion. Dysentery, typhus, and fever claimed lives even in calm weather. Every aspect of daily life was a negotiation between survival, labor, and the care of the treasure that the ship carried. The monotony of the voyage was punctuated by the terror of storms, pirate attacks, or navigational hazards. Hurricanes and typhoons could appear suddenly, forcing the crew to work in near impossible conditions to maintain sails, secure cargo, and prevent capsizing. During such storms, men were lashed to the rigging, drenched by waves and battered by wind, their lives dependent on strength, skill, and luck. The noise was deafening, the roar of the wind, the crash of waves, the strain of timbers and ropes under pressure. In these moments, hierarchy and discipline were critical, as any hesitation or error could doom the ship and its treasure. Even in calm conditions, vigilance was constant. Lookouts scanned the horizon for signs of land, reefs, or enemy ships. Sails had to be adjusted continuously to maintain course, and pumps were operated to remove water from hulls that leaked or accumulated through rain and waves. Cargo was secured, inventory checked, and maintenance performed on tools, weapons, and rigging. The journey demanded not just physical labor, but mental acuity, coordination, and endurance. Life aboard a galleon was relentless. There was little room for error or inattention. The social and cultural life aboard the galleons was shaped by isolation and shared hardship. Sailors developed bonds forged through adversity, relying on one another for survival during storms, disease, or attacks. At the same time, hierarchies created tension and competition, particularly over privileges, shares of plunder, or assignments. Religious rituals provided both solace and structure. Mass, prayers, and devotional practices were integral, with captains often invoking divine protection before storms or battles. Superstitions were pervasive, from rituals to appease the sea to omens interpreted in weather patterns or animal behavior. Faith, discipline, and shared experience created a fragile cohesion necessary for survival. The dangers of the voyage extended beyond storms and disease. Pirates and enemy privateers were constant threats, particularly near the Philippine archipelago and along the route to China. The galleons were heavily armed, with cannons lining the decks, but the slow, laden vessels were vulnerable. Crew members were trained in boarding defenses, gunnery, and emergency tactics, knowing that lives and treasure could be lost in a single engagement. These encounters required skill, coordination, and courage, reinforcing the importance of discipline and hierarchy even in the face of mortal danger. Work aboard the galleons was physically and psychologically demanding. Sailors often worked in shifts around the clock, maintaining sails, adjusting rigging, and responding to emergencies. Fatigue was constant, sleep was scarce, particularly during storms or when navigating dangerous waters. Nutrition was poor, and exposure to the elements led to frostbite, sunburn, and other injuries. Illness was rampant, exacerbated by cramped conditions, poor sanitation, and limited medical knowledge. The endurance of the crew was tested not only by physical labor, but also by the psychological strain of months at sea, isolation, and constant danger. Despite these hardships, the rewards of service could be significant. Officers and some crew members received shares of treasure or wages that, while modest by modern standards, were substantial relative to opportunities ashore. Knowledge gained at sea from navigation to ship handling could lead to advancement within the maritime hierarchy. Experience aboard a Manila galleon was both a training ground and a proving ground, where skill, courage, and endurance were measured daily against the relentless environment of the Pacific. The galleon's design and operation reflected the demands of the voyage. Ships were built to carry immense cargo, withstand storms, and mount heavy cannons. Cargo holds were organized for both security and efficiency, with silver and gold stored in accessible yet protected areas. Living quarters were cramped, with officers enjoying slightly more space and comfort, while ordinary sailors endured the tight confines of shared bunks or hammocks. Every element of the ship's design reflected the dual priorities of commerce and survival, balancing the need to transport immense wealth with the need to protect crew and vessel. Communication aboard the galleons relied on signals, flags, and orders shouted across decks. Coordination during maneuvers, storms, or attacks was critical, as the scale and weight of the ship made independent action difficult. Crew members had to understand their roles instinctively, working as a single unit to adjust sails, secure cargo, and respond to threats. The success of a voyage depended not just on leadership, but on the skill and cooperation of every individual on board, highlighting the collective nature of maritime enterprise. The Manila galleons were not only commercial vessels, but floating societies. They transported not just treasure, but people, culture, and knowledge. Crews included individuals from diverse backgrounds: Spaniards, indigenous peoples from the Americas, enslaved Africans, and local recruits from the Philippines. This mix of cultures created both tension and opportunity for exchange, as languages, customs, and skills intersected in confined quarters. The shared experience of long voyages forged bonds and hierarchies, with survival demanding cooperation despite social and cultural differences. Finally, life aboard the galleons reinforced the extraordinary resilience of humans in the face of danger. Months at sea, exposure to storms, disease, pirates, and the monotony of labor-shaped character, endurance, and skill. Sailors developed ingenuity, physical strength, and mental toughness, balancing fear and duty with the promise of reward and the hope of survival. The Manila galleons were crucibles of human experience, where the interaction of ambition, labor, and environment produced remarkable stories of courage, suffering, and achievement. Ultimately, the daily life of sailors aboard the Manila galleons illustrates the human dimension of empire. While the treasure fleets carried immense wealth, their success depended on the skill, discipline, and endurance of the men who operated them. Every storm survived, every reef avoided, and every engagement with pirates was a testament to human resilience. The galleons were floating microcosms of society, where hierarchy, labor, culture, and danger intersected to produce one of the most complex and consequential maritime enterprises in history. The Pacific, often thought of as vast and empty, was in truth a theater of constant tension, danger, and human cunning. Far from the storm-tossed waters of the Atlantic, the Manila galleons carried unimaginable wealth across thousands of miles, and with that wealth came predators, pirates, privateers, and rival nations' ships intent on intercepting the treasure before it reached Manila or Spain. Piracy in the Pacific was not merely opportunistic, it was strategic, violent, and shaped the very routes, schedules, and security measures of the Spanish fleets. In many ways, the galleon's greatest enemy was human, as relentless and unpredictable as the storms they faced. Piracy in the Pacific was fueled by both greed and the political realities of the time. European powers such as England, the Netherlands, and France were locked in an ongoing struggle to undermine Spain's dominance of global trade. Intercepting a Manila galleon was not just a crime, it was an act of economic warfare. A single successful attack could divert vast quantities of silver, silk, or spices, weakening Spain financially while enriching the captors. Privateering was legally sanctioned in many cases. Letters of marque authorized captains to attack Spanish ships, blurring the line between legitimate warfare and piracy. As a result, every voyage of a Manila galleon carried the implicit threat of human predators, adding another layer of peril to an already treacherous journey. The galleons themselves were heavily armed in response. Cannons lined the decks, strategically positioned to fire upon attackers from multiple angles. Crews were trained in gunnery, boarding defenses, and emergency maneuvers. Ships traveled in convoys whenever possible, their formation designed to concentrate firepower and protect slower or more vulnerable vessels. Despite these precautions, the ships were massive, laden with treasure, and relatively slow-moving, making them tempting targets for well-coordinated attacks. Every captain knew that a single engagement with pirates or privateers could determine whether a voyage ended in triumph or disaster. One of the most infamous attacks occurred in 1600 when the galleon San Diego engaged a Dutch warship near the Philippines. Though the Spanish crew fought valiantly, the ship was ultimately lost to both battle and the treacherous reefs of the Philippine coast. Dozens of men perished, and treasure sank to the ocean floor, lost for centuries. Such incidents were emblematic of the human and natural hazards the Manila galleons faced. In these encounters, courage and skill were essential, but often insufficient. Luck, timing, and knowledge of the sea could mean the difference between survival and catastrophe. Pirates were highly adaptive, learning the patterns of the galleon's routes and timing. The predictable schedule of departures and arrivals, dictated by monsoon winds, allowed privateers to anticipate movements and prepare ambushes. They exploited vulnerabilities in convoy formations, targeting slower ships or isolated stragglers. Boarding attacks were brutal, often resulting in hand-to-hand combat on the decks, with muskets, cutlasses, and cannons all contributing to the chaos. For the sailors defending the galleons, every moment was a struggle for survival, where one misstep could lead to death or the loss of centuries' worth of treasure. Despite the dangers, the human stories of defense and survival are extraordinary. Accounts describe captains rallying their crews, improvising defensive positions, and using clever tactics to repel attackers. Sailors fought tirelessly to protect both their lives and the immense wealth aboard, often sacrificing themselves in the process. The stakes were not abstract. Treasure fleets represented the economic lifeblood of empires, and failure meant not just personal loss, but the potential weakening of Spain's position in the Pacific. These confrontations elevated the Manila galleons from simple trade vessels to symbols of strategic power, bravery, and human endurance. Piracy also shaped maritime law and naval policy. Spain implemented strict regulations for convoys, including mandatory escorts, standardized signaling systems, and carefully documented cargo manifests. Captains were expected to follow precise routes, maintain formation, and report any unusual sightings immediately. The threat of pirates drove innovation in ship design, with reinforced hulls, stronger armament, and improved rigging to withstand both attacks and storms. Human predation forced the Spanish Empire to adapt continually, combining strategy, technology, and discipline to protect its treasure across vast oceans. The psychological toll on sailors was immense. Months at sea were already physically grueling, and the constant threat of attack added a layer of perpetual tension. Fear, anticipation, and the need for vigilance dominated daily life. Sailors knew that even a minor lapse in watch or a miscommunication could allow pirates to breach the ship, leading to plunder, injury, or death. The knowledge that a rival vessel could be waiting beyond the horizon created an atmosphere of anxiety and stress, where courage and composure were tested as relentlessly as physical endurance. Pirates themselves were diverse, ranging from opportunistic crews of small ships to organized privateers backed by European governments. They employed advanced tactics for their time, coordinated attacks, feigned retreats, and knowledge of local currents and wind patterns. Some established semi-permanent bases in isolated islands or coastal inlets, allowing them to resupply, repair, and plan ambushes. The combination of tactical intelligence, local knowledge, and sheer audacity made piracy a formidable threat to the Manila galleons. Every voyage became a high-stakes gamble, balancing the certainty of profit against the real risk of loss. Interestingly, piracy also influenced trade patterns. Spain often altered the timing and routes of galleons to avoid known pirate strongholds or unpredictable seasonal hazards. Convoys might take longer, less efficient paths to minimize exposure, illustrating how human threats could shape maritime strategy as much as natural forces. The interplay of geography, wind, currents, and human cunning created a dynamic environment where captains had to weigh risk against reward, knowledge against uncertainty, and courage against caution. Despite the danger, some pirates achieved legendary status, both feared and admired. Figures such as William Dampier and Thomas Cavendish became notorious for their exploits against Spanish treasure fleets, including Manila galleons. Their actions were chronicled across Europe and Asia, inspiring fear and fascination. These stories underscore the high stakes of maritime enterprise. Immense wealth was always balanced by the risk of violence, capture, and death. The galleons were targets not merely for opportunists, but for highly skilled, calculated adversaries who understood the value of the cargo and the consequences of success or failure. The human drama of piracy extended beyond the decks of ships to the ports themselves. Coastal settlements in the Philippines and along the Pacific were involved in defense, resupply, and intelligence gathering. Local populations sometimes aided pirates willingly or under duress, while Spanish authorities maintained fortifications and garrisons to protect galleons during loading, unloading, and maintenance. The web of influence extended hundreds of miles inland, illustrating how piracy and treasure fleets intertwined human, economic, and geographical networks. The most devastating attacks often combined natural hazards with human predation. Hurricanes could scatter fleets, leaving ships vulnerable to pirate attacks while already damaged and disoriented. A galleon surviving a typhoon could still be captured or sunk by human adversaries, highlighting the precariousness of every voyage. This combination of natural and human threats made the Manila galleons some of the most dangerous ships to sail in world history, where skill, courage, and luck determined the survival of both crew and treasure. Treasure lost to piracy was enormous. Entire shipments of silver and silk, worth millions of dollars by today's estimates, disappeared into the hands of privateers or were scattered across the ocean. For Spain, these losses represented not merely financial setbacks, but a disruption of global economic influence. Merchant networks, military campaigns, and diplomatic negotiations were all affected. Every successful pirate raid reinforced the vulnerability of empire, demonstrating that human cunning could rival the power of fleets and fortifications in shaping history. Yet, despite the perils, the Manila galleons continued to sail for over 2.5 centuries. Their resilience was a testament to human ingenuity, discipline, and endurance. Captains learned to anticipate pirate behavior, adjust routes, and train crews in defensive measures. Ships were designed to carry treasure securely while mounting formidable defenses. Every voyage was a negotiation with danger, balancing the rewards of wealth with the ever-present risks of the Pacific. In the end, piracy in the Pacific was not merely an element of adventure or legend. It was a defining feature of maritime empire. The human threat shaped strategies, technology, economics, and the very psychology of those who sailed the galleons. Treasure fleets were more than ships carrying silver and silk. They were arenas of human conflict, ingenuity, and courage. The legacy of piracy and privateering is inseparable from the story of the Manila galleons, underscoring that every ingot of silver and bolt of silk was fought for not just against storms and reefs, but against the most relentless predators of all, men at sea. Piracy, storms, and the sheer endurance of the crews together created a narrative of high stakes, extraordinary human skill, and indomitable spirit. As the last voyage concluded, arriving at Manila or Acapulco, the galleons carried not only their treasure, but the stories of survival, courage, and human ingenuity. They became symbols of both ambition and peril, illustrating that the wealth of empires was inseparable from the dangers faced by those who transported it. The Pacific, vast and indifferent, and the human adversaries within it, ensured that every voyage was a saga of risk, endurance, and the pursuit of unimaginable reward. Ultimately, the story of piracy in the Pacific concludes the saga of the treasure fleets with clarity. Wealth could be created, transported, and guarded, but it could never be fully secured. Nature and humanity alike demanded vigilance, skill, and courage. Treasure was the prize, but survival was the constant struggle. The Manila galleons, their crews, and the predators that hunted them stand as enduring symbols of a time when empires stretched across oceans and fortunes were won or lost by the courage, ingenuity, and perseverance of men daring to challenge both the elements and each other.